Okay, so I first wanted to start off by saying that I'm going to be talking about trans athletes and how I believe that they should be able to compete in Olympic sports. This is a very controversial topic because this has to do with what many believe as simple binary rules. However, I completely disagree because there's so much more nuance than many cis people like to believe when it comes to transgender identity, sexuality, and how people perceive themselves. Um, I'd like to say that transgender athletes first started being allowed to compete in the Olympics since 2003, as stated by transathlete.com, a website created in 2013 for information based on the inclusion of transgender athletes. This information is pretty recent. However, it states that transgender people have been able to compete as I wouldn't even say early. 2003 is still within my lifetime. I was born before that even was a thing. So to put into perspective, I am 21 and trans athletes only began allowance into the Olympics when I was 3 years old. So I wanted to talk about the preview statements. I'm going to start off with the opposing viewpoint and how my arguments will be shaped around that, and how I will target gender and race in this presentation based on my research. And so the first opposing viewpoint that I've noticed is that people like to say, why do I have to compete against a male body? Complains mountain bike racer Leah Schilberg. I got this from a website called Transgender Athletes Have an Unfair Advantage at timesnews.net, which was created in 2021. Let me see if I can move the recording. And another opposing viewpoint is how sex is binary, apparent at birth, and identifiable through singular biological characteristics, as stated by Strangio, a editor and article writer that works at ACLU News and Commentary. This article was made in 2020. These arguments are inherently wrong, as stated before, about the nuance that comes with transgender bodies and athletics, because there's so much more to how bodies are curated through life and how they are shaped to best support whatever sport that they are playing. However, in the societal viewpoint, in their eyes, a male is a person with a penis, usually stronger than women, a bigger muscle mass. They are faster, they swim better. They're just more physically fit for more taxing sports. And so most of the arguments are towards trans women. That is a male to female body. And a lot of this can be traced back to how some believe that men are taking advantage of women to win medals so that they can garner fame or money. However, this is simply unattainable because of what trans women have to do to be able to compete alongside cisgender women. So I mentioned how 2003 was the first time a transgender person was allowed to compete, but it wasn't until 2021 that a transgender athlete was actually competing in the Olympics. This is because it was completely impossible for them to get into the competitions. They had to have matching genitalia to their gender identity. They had to have official authorities recognize that. And then the hormones must have been taken up to 2 years before the genitalia, or even after the genitalia surgery. So this is something that they would have to completely identify with, change their body to what society sees fit, and then still continue this process even 2 years after. It's a complete commitment. It updated the rules updated in 2015, where trans men were eligible to compete without restriction. And the expectations for trans women were a lot more strict. So they had to identify as female for a minimum of 4 years prior to competing, completely disregarding trans people and how coming out is more dangerous than staying in the closet. Their testosterone levels must meet a certain requirement. This requirement can be changed based on individuals. And the consistent testing may be monitored. Non-compliance can lead up to a 12-month suspension. So imagine you are completely respecting the rules given to you as a trans woman. You are identified as a woman for 4 years. You finally reached where you need to with your HRT, and yet if you mess up even once, you still get a year suspension. And this is something that is hard to keep up with, even as a cisgender person doing whatever they need to excel at their sport. Trans women just have another thing that they have to tackle. So the reason why I'm bringing up race in this is because when gender is attacked, race is usually going to follow suit, because what society sees as the norm is white cisgender men and women who are at the peak of their level, at their apex, and they just they excel at what they do. But how this leads into race is because here, for example, this quote says, Olympic champion Caster Semenya has been banned from competing in any race since 2018. Telfer, Semenya, Mboma, and Masalingi's cases all reflected the ways womanhood is policed and defined along racist, transphobic parameters that falsely define womanhood as white, cisgender womanhood. So anyone who isn't seen as feminine enough can be tested and then later banned based on individuals. So, what happens to trans women can happen to cisgender women based on race, because, say, a cisgender woman looks more masculine than a white woman compared to her. Florida has become the latest U.S. state ban to transgender girls and women participating in female sports at public schools. This comes from BBC News, how Florida bans transgender athletes from female sports. This makes it even more difficult to get into your respective sport, because you can't train at it at a young level alongside cisgender people of the same age, so you don't get the same amount of experience as people at the same age. But to finish off with my final point, the woman on the very right, her name is Hannah Mounsey. You can see her name is at the bottom. She says, we permit very tall women to compete against short women in sports that select for tallness like basketball, volleyball, or rowing, and we consider that fair. So we permit very large competitive advantages through natural characteristics, which is important to note because transgender women are no better than cisgender women. It just is based on the sport and how they excel in their own respective way. Like this woman, she plays in lacrosse with these women, and she's noted how it's more difficult for her to catch up to women that are smaller than her because of their size and how they are more dexterous than her. So with my final point, I like to say that transgender athletes are not born to take away from cisgender athletes, but to add to the community that is competitive sports.